Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. This is some Christian guy, and today this Christian guy is going to talk about the issue of Christmas. Haha, nice little bit of controversy. Seeing as the Christmas season is coming up, I thought I'd get my own little Christmas video rant, or whatever the case might be, in before the season, because for those of you that are familiar with memes and all that kind of stuff, you will have seen that one that came out of Game of Thrones with what's his name, Sean Bean, who's the actor, where he's sitting there with his sword and he's like, winter is coming, right? It's like, as a Christian, right, or not only as a Christian but as anyone that knows memes, you can be like, the Christmas is evil memes are coming, right? And it happens every holiday, Easter, Halloween, Christmas, where you get all these memes all over the place, and there's this massive consternation in the Christian community. Oh, how, between whether Christmas is okay and we should just go and celebrate it, or whether Christmas is evil and we should shun it and shun everyone as a heretic who celebrates Christmas, right? And it just goes on ad nauseum, and people have massive fights and massive discussions and things like that. And a lot of the time, not that there's a problem with the discussion, right? But the problem, there's nothing wrong with discussions in themselves, but the vast majority of people, when they're having this discussion, they're not interested in the truth. They're only interested in pushing their own version of religiosity, and that's it, right? Those who are either for or those who are against. So and I have a problem with people on both sides, right? A lot of people who are for it, the only reason why they're for it is because they don't care whether it's right or wrong, right? The only reason why they're for it is because it's hell of an inconvenient, especially if they have kids. It's a hell of an inconvenient to tell your kids no, and to then go through the disappointment of saying no to your kids and all that kind of stuff, and to be ostracized by people as being fanatical and all that kind of stuff. And because even they themselves, they want to be able to indulge in all of the things that are Christmas because it's nice and fun and all that kind of stuff. So those are the type of people that, like even the Bible talks about, they're more interested in putting the favor that they have for their own traditions in front of what's true, and in terms of observing the law of God. So generally speaking, I'm not saying all, but the vast majority of it is people who are more willing to compromise, and they're arguing for it because it's inconvenient, and because they would prefer, right, to celebrate Christmas and all that kind of stuff. The actual truth of the matter has nothing to do with it. And then a lot of people who are arguing against, it's the same thing, right? They have their own version of religiosity, their own version of righteousness, and everything must be avoided. And a lot of these people, it's like if you so much as say happy holiday, then you're a sinner because you're participating in whatever. And those are generally the type of people that want to make almost everything in life is a sin, right? They're like zealots. It's just overboard. It's ridiculous. So they're not interested in the objective truth. They're only interested in their particular version of what is right and holy, and you must avoid absolutely everything under the sun. Otherwise you're evil, right? And that's wrong, right? And neither one of those stances is a decent stance, is a respectable stance, and which is why the question never gets resolved, first of all, and why there's almost just so much infighting, because people are self-referencing. It's nothing objective, right? So I myself have migrated between the two factions, mostly because the arguments were so rubbish that I found myself being, going there because that argument is garbage, and going, yeah, that argument. So having been a former pagan myself and coming into Christianity, because of the biblical principle, which is a legitimate principle, by the way, I wanted to avoid the appearance of evil, right? And that's one of the principles in Christianity. Try to avoid the appearance of evil. So for me, I was like, at the moment, I don't know whether it's okay or not. So in order to err on the side of caution, I'd rather abstain from celebrating Christmas and stuff like that, in case I'm actually doing something that's wrong. So rather err on the side of caution, and I'd have a lot of debates and discussions with people about whether it was right or not, and things of that sort, to try and sort of get to the bottom of it. And like I've just explained, a lot of the arguments were just absolutely garbage, both in favor of and against, and generally I've been completely and utterly unsatisfied with it, like completely, right? So now we're going to get stuck in, right? Here's the first argument that the vast majority of people make, right? They say that Christmas is got its roots in paganism, right? Back in the day, whenever it was, whoever it was, did X and Y and Z, and it's all pagan, and Dionysus and so on and so forth, Wotan and etc etc etc, all these pagan gods had their birthdays on Christmas and they were resurrected, and so they trace everything back to a pagan origin, and they say because it's pagan in origin, therefore, right, it is something we shouldn't celebrate. Now here's the problem with that argument. That argument is a genetic fallacy, right? And the genetic fallacy, if we go to Wikipedia, anywhere really, it's all going to be generally the same. So the definition, to get it right? The genetic fallacy, which is also known as the fallacy of origins or the fallacy of virtue, right, is a fallacy of irrelevance. So basically, even though it may be true, it's irrelevant to the current discussion, right? It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Is a fallacy of irrelevance that is based solely on someone or something's history, origin, or source, rather than its current meaning or context. So, for example, you could say to someone, I don't believe you on this because you used to be a scoundrel, right? That also takes sort of the form of an ad hominem, but anyway. So because you used to be a scoundrel, therefore your thing, and it's like they might have it is possible that they used to be a scoundrel and not particularly trustworthy, but that is absolutely irrelevant as to whether what they're saying now is true or has merit, right? So you can't discredit something like that. Whatever the origin was, or even if the argument was formulated poorly, it doesn't mean it's wrong, right? The origin, it doesn't matter, right? The conclusion may be right or whatever, or wrong, whatever, but you don't prove it by appealing to where it came from, okay? And that's basically what it is. People are trying to discredit Christmas by appealing to the historicity that it was founded in pagan origins. Now, if for those of you who think that is a legitimate, right, that's a legitimate argument, because it was pagan before, we shouldn't accept it now, we should have nothing to do with it at all, right, because we're giving the appearance of evil. If that is a valid argument, then you have to throw away the cross. You're never allowed to use the symbol of the cross ever again, because the symbol of the cross was a pagan symbol, was a symbol used by pagans, not a pagan symbol, right? Because a lot of people don't actually understand the whole use of symbols and things like that particularly well. Because it's a symbol pagans used, therefore, if that's a legitimate argument from origins, right, a genetic fallacy, if it's acceptable, then logically no Christian should ever use the sign of the symbol of the cross for anything, right? But obviously, that's an illegitimate argument, because within the Christian faith, Jesus died on the cross, and for us, it completely changed the meaning. Completely gave a new life and a new meaning and a new spirit to the symbol of the cross, where once upon a time it may have been pagan. So you will find that the cross was the center of the circle in the astrological charts, in horoscopes and things like that, separating the 4 equinoxes and the 4 seasons and stuff like that. You find it there, yeah, fair enough. And then also in the context of the Roman Empire, with all the crucifixion and stuff, it was a symbol of absolute great horror and shame and all that sort of thing. But then Christ completely changed its meaning, right? It's still suffering and stuff like that, but at the same time it's redemption, it's salvation, it's victory, right? So a symbol can change its meaning, and so it's not invalidated by its origins, or not at all, and it's perfectly reasonable for Christians, because there's such a strong and powerful thing in the historicity. There's no problem, we can have it. So that shows how the argument from origins, pagan origins, for Christians is completely if we want to invalidate Christmas, it doesn't work. It's an invalid argument. You cannot use it, right? Cannot use it. Even if it was true, which it actually is not. It's actually not true that the whole Christmas celebration and stuff like that was actually entirely pagan, right? There's not actually a whole heck of a lot of evidence for that. And here's an interesting thing, right? Now, there are people, now moving away from the genetic fallacy, that is an illegitimate argument. Now to go into the actual historicity of it, right? Just because it's interesting, right? A lot of people who sort of self-style themselves as historians and scholars or whatever, and even myself, I'm not a scholar, right? So I'm not writing doctrine here or anything like that, right? Go and check it out for yourself, man. But a lot of people just get a lot of stuff wrong, right? And conflate things that shouldn't be conflated and stuff like that. Now, we need to understand this whole thing. Now, in the same way that a Christian attempts to invalidate Christmas, right, by referring to the pagan origins, a lot of atheists as well try to invalidate Christianity as a whole by referring to pagan parallels within Christianity, right? And they say, oh, well, look, so, and then because a lot of the paganism predates Christianity, they say, well, you know, Christianity just borrowed, right? And this is also, it's complete and utter garbage. You see movies like the Zeitgeist movie. It's a total, I'm not going to say it's a total piece of trash, because it isn't, because there is a lot of good stuff in there, right? Trade Center and all these kinds of things. It's actually how it talks about today's currency and all that kind of stuff. But its section on religion is such utter garbage. It's unbelievable. It's just completely unbelievable how utter garbage it is. And this idea that Christianity has borrowed things from the pagan past and all that kind of stuff, and it's nothing but just redressed paganism, it actually comes from an old and now defunct school of historical thought, which one of the intentions were, and we're talking about sort of secular scholars and things like that, where there was a lot of effort put into trying to debunk Christianity and trying to invalidate Christianity by doing this kind of parallel to Egyptian gods and all these kinds of things. And this was a scholarly work which failed completely. I think it was common to like the 40s and the 50s and things like that. I could be slightly wrong or on my dates here. What we call, I think it was like the no quest period for Jesus Christ, and out of that sort of period, you sort of emerged like the Christ mythicists, like people who say that Jesus Christ never existed and all that kind of stuff. He's just a myth that we borrowed, and they tried to draw these parallels between Jesus Christ and certain pagan gods and things like that. It was all total garbage, and this position is no longer held. It was once held, but this position is no longer held by scholars, whether religious or whether secular. This position is not held at all, right? By scholars that try to do this ancient text and these religious analyses and stuff like that. So when they look at the ancient Jewish religion, they view it in its own context and not by constant reference to other pagan religions and things like that. So that's an old sort of thing. So interestingly enough, the argument that Christians are using is actually very, very similar one to the argument that a lot of atheists are using in order to debunk Christianity and try to show how Christianity is invalid and all that kind of nonsense because it's just some pagan invention. That's rubbish. That's absolutely rubbish. Now, it is true that as Christianity spread, right, from first century, you have the apostles, they spread throughout the world, right, that as people changed their religion and changed their faith, right, prior to that they'd been keeping a lot of, so for example the Roman Empire, right, they had something like 200 public holidays during their time, right? 200, that's almost the average year is 365 days, and you've got 200. I mean, you're almost constantly celebrating something, right? So the fact of the matter is, just from the sheer volume, right, just from the sheer volume of pagan holidays that there are, anyone trying to excavate some sort of a parallel from Christianity into the pagan is gonna find something, right? Because the pagan holiday, there was just so many, just on every freaking day of the year. It was just absolutely unbelievable, right? So what you find if you actually do the historical research is that you will find that as Christianity spread, right, throughout all the different cultures, just all over the place, that they would develop their own traditions, and sometimes they would borrow the festival or the holiday itself, but switch it around and give it a new meaning, give it a new emphasis, right? And this is actually okay, right? This is actually okay, well, because today we still do it, right? We've taken the cross and we've swapped the whole tradition around it and given it a different meaning. It's got a different meaning to us, right? And because Christianity has spread so far and wide, and the influence has been so far and wide, that generally the change in the understanding of the cross is almost has been a universal change, a global change in how we perceive the cross, right? But that's because of the extent to which Christianity has actually spread. So locally, people all over the place would have taken their faith as they converted and all of these kinds of things. And you know, people would have done things imperfectly, right? That's what we're like. We would have done things imperfectly. There would have been a little bit of syncretism and stuff, you know, all over the place. I mean, you can find all kinds of stuff in the historical past that if you wanted to really be peevish about it, you could be. And a lot of the backlash that we have today, right, in terms of that real sense of trying to distance ourselves from certain things, actually comes from the Protestant tradition. Now, a lot of people wonder, why do we celebrate Christmas today, right, today, on the 24th, 25th, right? It was actually because Protestants moved it to the 24th and the 25th. It was because of Protestantism, right? If I'm not mistaken, and we can have a look here, during the 16th and the 17th centuries, right? If you look at the books, Forbes, Bruce David, Christmas, A Candid History, University Press of California Press, 2007, right? And Köhler, Erika, Martin Luther, under the Festbrauch, Cologne, 1959, and Martin Luther, soll das Christkind erfunden haben. Mind my German. And there is, I'm going to put the title, you guys will see it, right? It's Luther 2017. So there's historical sources and stuff like that where it was actually the Protestants that moved it over, right? Because prior to Protestantism, the whole festival, which is actually the festival of Saint Nicholas. It's Saint Nicholas. It's not the god Wotan, and we'll get into the history. It's not the god Wotan or whatever the case might be, right? The festival of Saint Nicholas was actually held and practiced, right? So in the modern times, the general way that we sort of celebrate Christmas comes from the Dutch tradition, right? And the Dutch were among the many people who converted to Protestantism. But before that, the Dutch were very Catholic, right? They were Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, all that under that sort of umbrella. They don't agree very much these days and all that sort of thing. But back in those days, there was a lot of that, and it comes from the tradition of Saint Nicholas, right? They're celebrating the celebration of Saint Nicholas, and he was sort of the patron saint and all that sort of thing, right? Now, those celebrations, those festivities were held on the 6th of December, and depending on which calendar, right, because you have the Julian calendar, you've got the Gregorian calendar and all that kind of stuff, depending on which calendar you're using, it would fall on different days, and the days are either the 6th of December or the 19th of December, not the 25th. It was actually the Protestants, and the reason for that is because the Protestants, and Protestantism is great. The Reformation was fantastic. It's a good thing that we broke away from the Catholic Church. Fair enough, all those kinds of things. But one of the dangers and one of the problems with Protestantism is that you can't identify yourself solely or exclusively always as just being contrarian about what you're against, right? Because then it does cause knee-jerk reactions, and this is what happened. Because we want to be different and abolish all of the Catholic saint veneration, and that's what they wanted to do, right? The veneration, the practical worship of saints is wrong, right? Because they're only humans, so you shouldn't be worshiping saints. And because they want to recoil from this, but they wanted to keep the really sort of nice traditions and stuff like that, then they moved the emphasis over to Christmas, right? To the 24th, and it's about the Christ child and the gift of salvation and all that kind of stuff that the birth of Jesus Christ signifies to us and all that sort of thing, and that's why it was actually moved across. And the fact that it happens to be on the 25th or the 24th and stuff like that, I'm not entirely sure what all the reasons necessarily were. Might be to just remove it, because the thing is, actually I do know the reason. The reason is that depending on the area, right, the festivities were sometimes, so for the old St. Nicholas traditions, the festivities sometimes extended all the way to the 23rd of December, right, was when the festivities could go. And so in order to avoid all of that, then they made it on the 24th, and from there, 24th, 25th, Christmas Day, and then it goes from there, and that's why it is. So it has nothing to do with them sort of sitting over there and excavating the pagan traditions and saying, I'm gonna appropriate this pagan thing and fool all the stupid Christians into believing this pagan thing. It's nonsense. And the fact of the matter is, Everyone always knew that Jesus wasn't born on the 25th of December, right? We've always known that. But it's irrelevant because we don't really know when Jesus was born. Some people place the date somewhere in March, right? But this is basically, it's tradition, and there's nothing actually wrong with tradition, right? The only time tradition is a bad thing is when the tradition comes smack against the laws of God. That's the only time a tradition is a bad thing, right? But as long as you're obeying the laws of God and you don't violate the laws and principles of God, you're free to make any tradition you want because they're nice. It's nice to have holidays and big events where we gather as communities and gather as people in a certain common understanding and things like that. There's nothing wrong with that, okay? Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But, if you think so, go ahead, right? So that is a bit of a knee-jerk reaction that a lot of people, that Protestants, that in the desire to ever protest, and protest is good, but but protesting for the sake of it is also not good, right? So in the desire to ever protest, it's like, no, we've got to recoil because the word tradition has got this bad, and it's like, it depends on how the traditions are being executed, right? So when Christ rebuked the Jews and saying, you have a fine way of setting aside the law of God in order to observe your own traditions, he's not rebuking the fact that they have traditions. He's rebuking the fact that in order to observe them, they necessarily have to put aside the laws of God because they didn't understand the laws of God and things like that. So as long as you don't violate the laws of God, hey, you're free. You're autonomous. God is not a tyrant that you've got to, never have fun and never have any joy and all these sorts of things. And so as a result, because we come down from the Dutch sort of European culture, some of the elements would have come in and all that sort of thing, because the evergreen trees are, we've got the conifers and all these kinds of things here. It's common in our lands, and so these things are artifacts not only from whatever pagan religion and stuff, and even the pagan religions only adopted them because that was available in the environment. It's fine. It's not a problem. So where was I going with this? So it was actually the Protestants that moved it up, right? Now, the festival was of Saint Nicholas, right? Sinterklaas was how it was called by the Dutch. Sinterklaas. Now, it goes back to the tradition of celebrating the day of Saint Nicholas, right? Now, Saint Nicholas, to give you the name of the saint himself, we're going to have a quick look-see here, quick squiz here, right? It was Saint Nicholas of Myra, right? According to the traditions, he was born on the 15th of March 2070 and lived up until the 6th of December 343. So this is a 1st century chap. He was also known as Nicholas of Bari. Was an early Christian bishop of the ancient Greek city of Myra in Asia Minor, modern day Demre of Turkey, right? So he was actually probably a Turk during the time of the Roman Empire, right? So 1st century, and he's revered by many Christians as a saint because in the traditions he performed miracles and all that sort of thing, and so on and so forth. So, and we actually don't really know much about the guy. Most of what we know about him is through tradition and stuff like that, and it's and there are actually certain lists that actually put him as being one of the attendants at the Council of Nicaea, right? He was according to tradition, right? Because there was a major persecution of the Christians by the Emperor Diocletian, right? And he was actually cast according to tradition. Now, he was actually thrown into prison during the persecution of Diocletian. And he was lucky to be thrown in prison because Diocletian was I think it was the 10-year war. It was he just slaughtered Christians left, right, and center. He was just indiscriminate. I mean, he was unbelievable. But then was released once Constantine actually became emperor himself, and he himself converted to Christianity, and so a lot of this stuff then sort of goes from there. And then he was according to tradition, he was an attendee at the Council of Nicaea in 325, and although he's not mentioned in any writings by the people who were actually attendant, and so on and so forth. And here's a very, very interesting legend, right? It says legends claim that he was temporarily defrocked and imprisoned during the Council of Nicaea for slapping the heretic Arius. Arius, for those of you that know, was the Arian heresy. I believe he they teach that Jesus Christ is not divine, or that he's subordinate to the Father in some way, and there's a problem with the divinity. So it's known as the Arian heresy. So if Saint Nicholas actually did slap him, hey, big up to you, right? Oh dear. So just to show, this demure, like modern Protestantism and modern sort of evangelicals and stuff, we've got this pathetic pacifist attitude where we must never offend anyone, right? We pacifism all the way, right? It's garbage, right? It's not supported by history, right? Our church fathers, they were bold men, right? They were on fire. So the Arian heresy, if you got slapped, hey, fair enough, slap the guy. That was heresy, right? So anyway, so here's a really cool let me get the story here, right? So come on, let me find right. So here's why he's revered, okay, and might give you an idea of why we have some of the traditions that we have in the Christmas tradition. Because in the Christmas tradition, it's all about giving and helping the poor and stuff like that, right? Now you need to understand something, right? Only in the Christian tradition, right? Which is why we have the world as it is today, through not only in the Western world, but whatever influence the Western world has had on other countries. Yes, granted, they weren't always great, right? Because humans are not perfect, humans are stupid. But only in Christian faith do you have a philosophical foundation for helping the poor and the needy and being self-sacrificing in that way, okay? Prior to Christendom, no one gave a damn about the poor. No one gave a damn about women. No one gave a damn about the lame, about the sick. None of that, right? You got whatever was came, and that was it. No one cared. You could be a slave. It didn't matter, right? It was only because of the Christian ethic that gave each and every single human being intrinsic moral worth. Only once Christianity came in did that concept even exist. It was revolutionary, and as a result, it revolutionized the world. If it hadn't been for it, slavery would still exist. Okay, so here it is. This is according to tradition, according to legend, right? After his parents died, so we're talking about Saint Nicholas. After his parents died, Nicholas is said to have distributed their wealth to the poor, right? In his most famous exploit, which is first attested in Michael the Archimandrite's Life of Saint Nicholas. So there's disputes and things like that, fair enough, but here's the legend anyway, because sometimes the factual history doesn't matter. It's what people believe is true, and they carry that legend through the tradition and try to emulate what they think is something that's virtuous, right? And Saint Nicholas did what he did because he was a Christian and believed in Christian charity and so on and so forth and stuff. People might have worshipped him, which is wrong, and it might not have been something he even intended as an individual, but hey, a lot of times we can't help how people perceive us necessarily after their lives, right? So Nicholas heard of a devout man. So this is a tradition that Nicholas, he came across a story that he heard of a devout man, a man who was devout, who had once been wealthy but had lost all of his money due to the plotting and envy of Satan. So this unfortunate man, Satan just ruined him, okay? And the man had 3 daughters but could not afford a proper dowry for them, right? So this means that these daughters would remain unmarried, and probably in the absence of any other employment, because things were very difficult for unemployed, unmarried women in those days, right? They would be forced to become prostitutes, right? So Saint Nicholas, hearing of the girls' plight, decided to help them, but being too modest to help the family in public. And this is actually, again, this is a Christian doctrine, right? Where in the Bible you can go, it says, don't do your good deeds in front of other people to receive the praise of men, right? Do your good deeds in private, right? If it's really about humility. So it's a stark contrast to these stupid idiots out there, these NGOs and stuff like that, and these social justice warriors. We are for the poor, and look how wonderful we are because we're for the poor. That's garbage. And the Bible says these people have received their reward in full, right? But whatever you do in private for the benefit of your fellow man, in private, in humility, right? God's got your reward waiting for you, and he's gonna sort you out. He's got your back. But these people who are constantly doing this stuff for show, because they're actually false, they don't care about the poor people that they're actually trying to help. They only care about appearing wonderful in front of the world. And that's this whole political social justice warrior garbage that you've got out in the world. Why, oh, look at us, we're so righteous because I'm against poverty. It's like, who the hell isn't, right? Come on, I'm against poverty. Yeah, well done, good for you, right? Idiots, right? So that's actually comes from a deep Christian ethic, right? To do your good deeds in private, but being too modest to help the family in public, or to save them from the humiliation of accepting charity. And this is another reason why you should help people. Just don't go to, oh, look, I'm giving you charity, because you humiliate the other person, right? Give it to them, you know, in a way that maybe even they don't notice, and they open their bag one day and they see, oh, there's a bit of money in there. Oh, I can feed my children. They don't know they don't know who it came from. They don't know who it came from because you didn't let them know. And you know what? Then their praises will go to the one who was worthy of praise. Rather than their praises going to you, their praises will go to God, right? That is the correct way of doing it. And that's why you need to do it. You do your good deeds without people knowing, right? Because then the praises will go to God, not you. You don't elevate yourself. So to prevent them from the humiliation of accepting charity, and again, so Father Christmas, Santa Claus, goes on the night of the 25th when everyone's asleep, right, so that no one knows, and puts presents, right, puts gifts for the children, right? So here, he went to their house under the cover of night and threw a purse filled with gold coins through the window opening into the house. And he did say the same thing in the next 2 nights, giving the man a total of 3 bags of gold, one for each of the 3 daughters. Now, according to this version, on the 3rd night, the father of the 3 stayed up all night and actually caught St. Nicholas in the act of charity. And the father fell on his knees thanking him, and Nicholas ordered him, don't tell anyone, right? Ordered him not to tell anyone about the gift. And so the scene of St. Nicholas's secret gift giving is one of the most popular scenes in Christian devotional art, appearing in icons and frescoes across Europe. And although the depictions vary depending on time and place, obviously, because cultures have an influence, Nicholas is often shown wearing a cowl, while the daughters are typically shown in bed, dressed in their night clothes, while he's sort of, you know, popping something through the window, the money through the window. And many renderings contain a cypress tree or a cross-shaped copula. Right, so, you know, that's all sort of old Christian art, where all the little things have a symbol, have a meaning, right? And it's almost like doctrine put into an image, into a symbol, again, because it's like the cross, right? If you're a Protestant and you want to recoil from sort of symbols just, you know, out of hand, it's like, it's not necessarily a bad thing necessarily, because we have the cross. That's an icon, right? And and the cross represents a doctrine, the salvation and the sacrifice of. There's huge, massive doctrine contained in just that one symbol, right? So even though generally as Protestants we want to recoil, like just that knee-jerk, icons, you know, it's not always necessarily a bad thing, and it's not necessarily always a bad thing that the old medieval Christians and stuff used iconography in their paintings in order to depict the traditions and the ethics and the doctrines and stuff like that within the symbols and things like that, right? So it's not necessary, because, you know, and we're being hypocritical if we say that is bad. Meanwhile, we're sitting here clinging to our crosses, right, and having the crosses, our crosses in the church, right? Come on, you know. So there we go. Now, and so that's basically the sort of the historicity and what carries through, and this carried through all the way through all the ages. And I mean, we're talking 1st century, man. We're talking first, 2nd century, and all that sort of thing. So Now there was a lot of veneration, so the veneration is wrong. You shouldn't venerate people, right? He was a man, assuming he existed. He's a man, right? So he became a patron saint of fishermen, sailors, and all that sort of thing, and patron saint of children, and all these kinds of things. And the problem with having these where you venerate the individual, and that's just it. You're venerating the individual rather than venerating God, right? And that's a problem, right? That's where then we as Protestants then digress from the Catholic, where it's like, yeah, these were good holy men, fair enough, great, and they serve as examples that we can do it too, right? If they were merely mortal, sinful human beings and they could do that, it means we can too, right? So we don't have any excuse, and it's good to have these examples, these sort of what you call role models and things like that, because we have them all the time, right? Even today we look up to good ministers and things of that sort, and good people, we look up to them and things like that. But ultimately, if these people take the place of Christ, you've got a problem. If you start venerating them rather than Christ, right? The individual, as if that individual has their own merit, right? We're talking about like salvation through works, as if they've got their own merit and their own their own merit, like they save themselves. Then that's a problem. They don't, we humans, we're in a fallen state, and whatever good that we're able to do is through the grace of Christ that empowers us to do good things, because that's no longer in our nature, right? We fell, and then at the fall we inherited a fallen nature, and that's where our tendencies go, right? That's where what they talk about, the spirit and the flesh wants to go that way all the time, right? And when God helps us to elevate that spirit above, to have control and mastery over the flesh, then we can stay away from all of these bad things, right? So that's basically a bit of the historicity and all the arguments and stuff like that, just to go back a little bit, right? So that's the historicity and the genetic fallacy. That's a genetic fallacy. Don't do it. Argument from origins is a fallacy from origins. Don't do it. It's a bad argument. Just because it might have been pagan is whatever. And so in terms of the Christian tradition that has been around for thousands of years, right? That's more or less what the story is based on, right? That's more or less where it comes from, is the tradition of Saint Nicholas, who may have been a pretty righteous man. Whatever you might disagree with some of the stuff the Catholic Church might teach about him, what the traditions might even teach about it, whatever the case might be, it doesn't matter, right? Because again, genetic fallacy, right? But these are the principles and stuff like that, and that's why he is said to have done what he did, based on really solid Christian principles, by giving the charity, being concerned for people, being concerned for the girls, right? Because in pagan societies, the man will have lost his job, the girls would have gone into prostitution. Who cares? Prostitute the woman, that's all they're good for anyway, right? Is what the pagan religions and stuff, but pre-Christianity, that's what it been like, right? This concern for these daughters and the plight of this man, that's a purely Christian thing. The plight of your fellow man, right? Where you go and out of your own, you self-sacrifice out of your own blessings to give and help and try uplift the quality of life of other people. That's a Christian tradition, and to do it in private, right? In humility, in private, so that you don't get the praise and worship of the world for the good things that you do, but you reserve, instead of getting the praise and worship of the world for doing righteous things, you do it in private where God sees you, and then you are honored then by God instead. That is the right way to do things, right? And then you're doing it for beware of anyone who's doing their righteousness in public. Be very, very careful of that, right? So these are all very, very good principles that you can actually bring out of the thing, right? So if we look here, right, this is, if we had to try, and now people have tried, okay? If we go back to the genetic thing where it used to be pagan, right? Here's the interesting thing. The reason why the old style of trying to, and was a secular project that failed. The reason they tried to do that was because they're very anti-Christian, all right, as most secular people are. The West has come out of the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment is completely against religion. End of story, right? Especially Christianity, right? Enlightenment, right? And they tried to do this, but completely failed. And the only similarities that they could find between the Christmas and the traditions of Christmas and Wotan or Odin, right, which is the Nordic, if you look in Nordic mythology, are the following, right? The idea, right, that Sinterklaas rides the rooftops on his white horse, which has various names, right? Whereas Odin rides the sky in his grey horse, Sleipnir, right? Maybe I pronounced that correctly, I don't know. So there's only 4, right? There's the idea that Sinterklaas gives chocolate letters to children, like Odin, which gave rune letters to man. So they're trying to draw a parallel here, but there's a very big difference between Sinterklaas or Saint Nicholas giving chocolate or giving gifts and stuff like that. Now we need to remember, back in the old days, and anyone, actually even people alive today who lived through the rations of here in the UK and in Europe and stuff, they were sort of rationing how things are scarce, will know how scarce things like chocolate and sugar were back in the day. These were valuable things, right? So chocolate, so if someone giving, let's say, chocolate or whatever the case might be, which is an extremely valuable gift to people who otherwise went without because they were struggling, because they were peasants, right? The standard of life was bad in those days. And saying, oh, you know, this is like Odin giving runes to mankind. That's a stretch. That's a if you understand if you understand the religious ethic of the Christian and the pagan story of Nordic mythology, you're literally grasping at flipping at straws here, trying to draw these parallels. If you think that these two things have anything to do with the same ethic and the same morals and the same presupposition and the same epistemology and teleology and all these other, it's completely absurd. It's utterly absurd. Sorry, there's only 3, right? So Sinterklaas riding the rooftops on his white horse, which has maybe, okay, he's riding a white horse. Well, everyone, people in those days, they rode around in horses. Maybe he had a white horse, who knows, right? But obviously it's ridiculous that he was riding on the rooftops with him, okay. And this might have been some little fantastical imposition that was peculiar to a certain, it doesn't mean that, now this is Wotan imposed, okay? No, rubbish. And Sinterklaas carries a staff, which would have not been uncommon for people in those days. Sinterklaas carries a staff and has mischievous helpers with black faces who listen at chimneys to find out whether children are bad or good and report to Sinterklaas, whilst Odin has a spear and his black ravers Hugin and Munin who report what happens in the world to Odin. So this might be a cultural peculiarity, who knows, stuff that people might have made in their legends and things like that, but it has absolutely nothing to do with who the original man was, okay? These are just legends. And so these are people trying to pick out at like local legends and stuff like that, completely digressing from the original traditions of the church and trying to make these parallels and things like that. It's completely ridiculous. It's stupid, right? And the pagan, it's just, if you even knew one iota about Christianity and one iota about the Nordic pagan religions, you would know that they are so far removed from each other. It's absurd, right? And the more you get to know about them, the more absurd it becomes, right? To say that the one had anything to do with the other, it's balmy. It's utterly balmy, right? So there you have it. And then nowadays, right, if we look at so here's another thing, right? What's his name? Old Saint Nick, right? Old Saint Nicholas. He also used to. Here's a tradition also that comes from something that he was traditionally said to have done. Said the feast was both an occasion to help the poor by putting money in their shoes, which eventually evolved into putting presents in children's shoes, which is where the stocking comes from, right? If not their shoes, then in their little socks, sort of thing, which sort of evolved from there. And then a feast later on, similar to a carnival. So it unfortunately degenerates into debauchery that often led to costumes, a topsy-turvy overturning of daily roles, and mass public drunkenness. So, that's what people do, right? So, humans, what can you do, right? 16th, 17th centuries, right? So again, it was during the Reformation that this was shifted. from and maybe rightfully so, who knows, shifted to take the emphasis off the veneration of a particular saint, which is a good thing, veneration of a particular saint, and moved it over to be focused, because this tradition was everywhere, right? You're not going to get people, let me tell you something, trying to get people to stop practicing a certain tradition is almost impossible. Seriously, utterly, actually probably is impossible. So sometimes for the sake of pragmatism, sort of keep the tradition and shape the influence in a different constructive way, and you can actually get something out of it, which is good, which is what then the Protestants did. Actually the Calvinists in Spain actually went to the point of completely of banning it altogether. So yeah, because they had, obviously they had beef with the Catholics, so they abolished completely, boom, all Catholic celebrations, just abolished them entirely. But because the people didn't necessarily comply, they kept keeping a lot of the old traditions, so they eventually so even the Protestants eventually, let's carry on, but then have the emphasis in a different way. We emphasize the birth of Christ, and so on and so forth. And so for hundreds of years, this has been a Christian tradition. No one thinks of paganism. No one thinks of paganism unless they're trying to be causelessly peevish. No one thinks of paganism when they're celebrating Christmas, right? Even where I work, every single person there is either an atheist or a Gnostic, right? But the overwhelming majority are atheists, but like hardcore atheists, right? I'm a complete retard as far as they're concerned for being a Christian, right? And they know I'm a Christian, but because I don't act like a moron, they still respect me, okay? So because I don't try to shove it down people's throats and stuff like that. But there's this one guy especially, he's listening to music, Christmas carols about Jesus, the Christ child who came for our salvation. Even the atheist is listening to music about the gospel on Christmas, which is a good thing, hopefully the Lord can stir him somehow, right? So there's a lot of good that actually comes out of it, right? Now, during the 19th century, right, and for those of you who know, the Coca-Cola company, using the legends of Sinterklaas, or Santa, which is the English is Santa Claus, right? A lot of people like to say that Santa is an anagram of Satan, right? If you scramble up the words, and that's it. Yeah, if you scramble it up, you can get Satan out of it. There we go. But if yeah, okay, maybe, but so what? Again, who cares? No one thinks of that, right? It's not even present in the people's minds, right? It might be some conspiracy somewhere that Coca-Cola, and I wouldn't put it past the Coca-Cola, elites, people over there, feeding this garbage to people, right? To degenerate the human race with all their garbage food, but fair enough. But it doesn't matter, right? The Father Christmas, as we visualize him today, actually came from the Coca-Cola company, and the Coca-Cola company didn't invent Santa Claus. They got it from the traditions of Saint Nicholas, from the Dutch tradition Sinterklaas, who themselves, the Dutch, got it from the tradition of Saint Nicholas, through the church, through the thousands of years of church history, where the tradition was carried across and brought to the different European nations and beyond, right? The Christian traditions went into the north of Africa, India, China, all over the place. It really spread around, which is great, sort of thing. So, yeah. And then, here's an interesting thing, right? The whole thing of giving chocolate and all that kind of stuff. During the World War, the Germans occupied the Netherlands, right? So that was from 1940 to 45. Some of the traditional Sinterklaas rhymes were changed around to reflect actually the current events, and this gives you insight. The reason why I'm including this bit of information is because it gives you insight how traditions can change depending on the current climate, the current cultural climate that's in that particular time, which means it's not always some pagan satanic thing in the past. These just reflect what the average person on the ground was thinking and feeling and doing and knew to the best of their abilities at the time, which doesn't make it inherently evil. Might be mistaken, or whatever the case might be. But basically in 1940, in the 19, I think it was in 1941, yeah, 1941, some of the old Sinterklaas sort of Christmas rhymes and stuff like that were rewritten to reflect the current events going on during the World War, in which the classical poem, here we go, I'm going to read it for you, right? One poem was rewritten to celebrate the RAF, because the RAF dropped boxes of candy over, and so this was in 1941, the RAF dropped boxes of candy over the occupied Netherlands, right? So this was modified to reflect the good that was being done for them by the British forces during the World War, right? That act of kindness to drop candy, and so it would have been chocolates, would have been all kinds of things, right? So actually, I don't know if I'm gonna read it here, because it's got the Dutch and the English version, so I'm not going to read the Dutch because I'm going to butcher it, right? Even though I understand Afrikaans. Actually, it might be fun, so you guys can laugh at me a little. For the fun of it, I'm going to read it in Dutch. Sinterklaas kapoentjie, goeie wat in min skoentjie, goeie wat in min laarsie, dank u Sinterklaas. Right? The World War II version is RAF kapoentjie, goeie wat in my skoentjie, bid die moffen gooien, maar die gallen strooien. Right? And so this is the English version, right? Okay. For those of you who are laughing at me, great. I bring a smile to your face, no problem, right? And for those of you who are Dutch, I'm sorry if I butchered the hell out of it. Okay, English. Sinterklaas little kapon, throw something in my little shoe. Throw something in my little boot. Thank you, dear Sinterklaas. Right? And that's the original. And then the World War II version is RAF little kapon. Throw something in my little shoe. Throw bombs at the crowds, but scatter candy in Holland. So it's brilliant, right? So that's the thing, and this is how culture plays into things, right? And there's no reason for us to just go completely out of our freaking minds for things, right? Moffen was a slur for Germans. So moffen. What? How do you translate that? So German, the word in the way that the word kraut for German is a slur for the German, like kraut as in sauerkraut, because they like sauerkraut on everything, right? Sauerkraut's actually not that bad. I kind of like it, but anyway. So the krauts, that's how they were called, right? It's like referring to the French as a croissant or something like that, right? You croissant, you stupid croissant. It's the same thing, right? And moffen was a derogatory term in the Dutch for them, and at the time, yeah, well justified. Those Nazis were a bunch of bloody moffen, weren't they? So so that's just to show you, man. It's like we have these overly simplistic, and I'm pretty sure none of you have ever heard this about the whole Christmas tradition. We must stay away from this simplistic, narrow-minded view of history, right? And focus on what it means today. What does Christmas mean today? Now, for those of you that are Seventh-day Adventists, right, and I'm going to talk about Seventh-day Adventists because I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, and maybe a lot of Seventh-day Adventists will watch this and stuff like that. And we hold as authoritative, not canonical. We don't worship Ellen White, but authoritative as someone who's inspired and who's received a revelation. Much like the way a lot of people hold the old church fathers and stuff who wrote things because they were inspired or received revelation and stuff like that. It's one of those things that you should expect to happen in Christianity. Ellen White herself does not condemn Christmas at all. She doesn't condemn Christmas, right? What she condemns is how you celebrate it, right? Ellen White is perfectly fine with us celebrating Christmas if we do, like Saint Nicholas, right, have concern for the poor and those who have nothing during Christmas, who have nothing, who have nowhere to go, who have no family, and we look out for those underprivileged people during Christmas, right? And as they say, and I'm loath to say it because it's become such a cliche, but keep the Christ in Christmas, right? What are you here on this earth for? You're not here to indulge yourself, to go into debt, because people do this. They go into debt in order to buy Christmas presents for their stupid bratty children who they haven't bothered to discipline in their lives, right? They go into debt to buy Christmas presents. That is pathetic. You're going into debt to buy presents for your ungrateful brood, right? And yet there's kids out there who've got absolutely nothing, going without, when you could instead give that money to help someone else, right? Go and be with, or invite over, prepare a feast, invite over people who are going to be lonely or something like that. Do something decent, right? Show your Christianity, what Christianity is really about. Not this, because the whole Coca-Cola thing with the commercialization of Santa Claus and all, that's the secular thing. That's the secular version. A lot of people like to point to the Santa Claus of Coca-Cola. Oh, look, it's Illuminati conspiracy. Oh, anagram Satan. That's a secular trying to take over what is a very, actually pretty decent Christian tradition. Very decent Christian tradition, right? Which is meant to be there to consider the poor, the homeless. And not only the poor and the homeless, it doesn't have to only be the extreme. Just who's lonely? Who has nowhere to go? Right? I mean, people travel all over the world. I, as a foreigner, for example, I understand what it's like to go and live in another country and not really have a lot of, friends and family and all that kind of stuff. Because you're in a foreign country, you've left everyone behind, right? And how nice it is to have people that consider you, right? So one day for Christmas, even though Christmas is neither here nor there for me, right? It's just a personal thing. Maybe it's because I'm a miserable old goat. Who knows, right? My missus loves it. So I said to her, listen, we know actually a couple of foreign people. There was, some Portuguese people, some people from not Lithuania. Anyway, one of the Eastern Bloc countries. Forgive me, right? Another guy from Ecuador. So a whole bunch of who had no one here. They were going to spend Christmas on their own, right? And they were, a lot of them were part of our church and stuff like that. So I said, listen, guys, come over, right? And we didn't do it for ourselves because my missus and I were a bit antisocial, right? We're quite happy to spend Christmas by ourselves because we're quite happy. We're fully satisfied with each other's company, right? We did it for them because we knew they would enjoy it and they had no one to spend Christmas with. We did it for them, and that's what it's about. Do stuff for other people, right? Do stuff for other people. Give them. This is what Christianity is like. It's about consideration for others, self-sacrifice. All right, there's nothing wrong with that. So, dear Christians, if you share my video to anyone you see posting this garbage, right? Tell them to and stop the nonsense. Stop the unnecessarily stupid fighting over things. It's unnecessary. It's ridiculous. And it's one of those small, niggly, stupid little things that creates division in the church for absolutely no reason whatsoever. No reason whatsoever. And people are not trying to understand anything at all. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is my 2 cents on the issue of Christmas. And it's the same thing for Easter. It's the same thing, right? The traditions are there, and it's a little bit different, obviously. It's a different holiday and stuff like that, but essentially the same thing. And it's not the same for Halloween because Halloween is just clearly pagan, right? There's no Christian connotation there at all. Okay, none. So Halloween is not the equivalent. It's a straw man, right? It's not by accepting Christmas, you're not getting into a slippery slope of then celebrating Halloween, because Christmas is a Christian tradition and it has been for 1,000 years. Whereas the Halloween and stuff like that is just nothing. I mean, you go dressed around as demons and ghouls, and you're celebrating the dead. No one anywhere thinks that this has anything to do with Christianity in the way they do with. So this is not a slippery slope argument where now you have to accept all. No, not at all. Right? Not at all. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That's my 2 cents. I hope this helps you out. And don't be materialistic and stuff like that. Whatever money you waste on even that tree, that stupid tree, and all the ornaments and all the whatever, all the lights and stuff, don't waste money on that. Give it to someone who needs it, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with making your house looking a bit pretty and stuff like that, but don't go and blow hundreds of pounds and on that kind of stuff. It's wrong. You're wasting money. wasting money, So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, and don't pig out, right? Don't go and do the whole gluttony thing, right? Where we go and you gain 50 kilos just over the Christmas week, Don't do that either, right? That gluttony, that's wrong, right? So the body's a temple of God. Look after it. None of this overeating business, right? And indulging in stuff that you otherwise wouldn't because it's bad for you. Okay? So don't celebrate. You don't celebrate God by harming your body. Anyway, I better stop it there, otherwise I'm going to go forever. Right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Like, subscribe. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Facebook. Just look for me, Some Christian Guy. I'm also on One Way. For those of you that are part of look for something that doesn't track you and do all that untoward business on the internet, like Facebook that sells all your details. Cheerio, and have an absolutely marvelous Christmas. And say to people, Merry Christmas. None of this happy holidays, social justice, politically correct garbage either. You say to people, Merry Christmas. And if they have a problem with it, then they can go and soak their heads, right? They're in a Christian country. Done. Don't be spineless Christian, okay? Cheerio. Goodbye.